Oh, you call me having a cup of tea in one of my surveyor's mugs. It's nice, isn't it? Little tape measure there. It's available on my website. Right, well, today I'm going to take a look at using this again. And in my previous presentation, I showed you the basics of this. And in one of the LinkedIn posts, a certain Mr. Malcolm Holland asked if I would perhaps demonstrate Graham Coleman's pattern of readings, which shows condensation staining. And that is the Malcolm Holland that's wrote this fantastic book on diagnosing structural movement of buildings. And he has also now done a new book as well, which I will do the link to. So what is this all about? So Graham Coleman is one of the great guys who knows pretty much everything about damp and damp assessment. And he sort of came up with this pattern of readings from these bits of kit to help us establish kind of what's going on behind the wall. So this is a nice little sneaky trick that you can know. So just to remind you that this damp meter or moisture meter doesn't measure damp. It simply either measures electrical resistance between these two pins here, or it does fringe resistance out through the scanner at the back. So it takes neither damp readings nor moisture readings. But what it does is it can provide us with a series of consistent readings which we can compare. And by doing that, we can come to some kind of logical conclusion to help steer our clients. So how am I going to demonstrate this to you? Well, I thought what I'd do is I'd come up with like a mock wall. So here it is, a little bit like from Typical Suspects. But essentially this is my wall. There's the skirting board there. So this line represents 250, this one 500, 750, 1000, 1250 and 1500. So you would use your damp meter. Again, you would go to the spot where you can test it and calibrate it by going to a spot in the house, maybe on the stairwell, something like that, to check what the standard reading is where you assume it would be dry, and then compare everything to that. So don't forget there are a number of ways in which this machine can be affected. So let's take a look at the first set of readings. So let's say you do a low reading at the bottom here, and let's say that you get an extremely high reading. Now you'll notice I'm not putting any figures on this at all because it's all relative. Let's just say that your meter goes a little bit ballistic. Now you need to be careful because here's the skirting board here. That would be made of timber. So you would almost certainly use your prongs because that's what they were invented for. And you could put that in there first and decide what is happening there. Because if timber is in contact with a damp wall and it becomes damp itself, then this is why this meter was invented. It was invented to provide you readings in wet timber. Okay, and not really in anything else. So once you've done the skirting board, you really should then perhaps go to the scan reading, because if you're doing an observational assessment of a house on a pre-purchase survey, you don't want to damage the plaster, and this is nice and quick. But don't confuse the two readings. The prong readings and the scanner readings are not really the same. Okay, so let's say you go on up the wall. Little tip here with the meter is don't drag it along the wall. Okay, so don't scan it around like this. Okay, you need to pick it up, place it, pick it up, place it. Okay, that's because you don't want to damage the back. Now, let's say that the next reading up to 500 is very high. And let's say you head on up the wall, doing all your due diligence, and that is also very high. So you are starting to think, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And then you carry on up to about a meter. Let's say it starts going to a medium reading. See the M, see what I'm doing there? And then maybe at the top, higher up, all goes to green above there. Now, what you would do then is that you would progress across and see if any of that stopped, to see if it was a patch, just like I did in my previous demonstration, which is how to use an industry damp meter, if you like to find that somewhere else on the channel. And so assuming that this is your reading up the walls, then what you've got here is the typical pattern for a defective or missing damp proof course and contaminated plaster. So in other words, this could be rising damp. But don't forget, we cannot say for certain that just because we get these readings, it must be rising damp. What we're doing though is saying, well, here's a set of readings, here's the type of house, here's something we've seen on the outside, we're assuming it's a solid wall, we haven't seen a damp proof course, and you start stringing all that information together. So this gradual diminishing scale of the readings is typical for rising damp. It could also be typical for penetrating damp, because that's really just coming in from the side, but you can get odd blotches if it's to do with cascading water off rainwater pipes, or just driving rain, or it's a westerly wall. So you can get different readings if you have that kind of scenario going on. Right, so let's look at the next one. I'm going to put that down for a moment, but I will just have another sip of my tea from the mug. That's very good. Right, let's try the next one. So you're on your survey, you start at the base of the wall, and you get a very low reading, VL. And let's say you start moving up the wall, you get another very low reading. And then as you move up, it starts to get a bit higher. Still not particularly high, but a little bit higher. And then you move on up, and then you get a medium reading. Now that is quite odd. We're now at between 750 and a metre above the floor. And then we go up again, and you get like another medium reading. And then if you go up there again, then it sort of peters out to green or zero. So what you can see here is it's sort of hovering here, dips down, and then gradually rises and pans away again. Now what that is a salt band, and that happens when a wall has had rising damp in it before. The salts have moved up through the wall, they've been left at the highest spot, and then intervention has taken place. Someone's come along maybe and taken out the contaminated plaster, put on a new finish, damp proof course or whatever, and what's left is this band, residual band, in the brickwork that's still left. Now this can leach and can, because it's got hygroscopic salts in it, that affects the plaster, and then the meter will go off. Now sometimes that does result in staining, because what happens is it pulls the moisture from the air into the plasterwork, and then you kind of get a staining effect, and that can come and go seasonally. Okay, so some people might phone you up and go, I've got this funny shadow band round the house. And I've been into a Victorian house where that band has literally been around the entire house. So that's what it is. I've also done a video on it. I found it in a basement, and I did a recording of that. So there is a live case study of that on the channel. So let's take a look at another example. So starting at the bottom again, not in the skirting, although it possibly would go off in the skirting, you get a high reading or very high reading at the base of the wall. But then it just suddenly stops. You go on up and you get a green. You check again to make sure you're not looking at salt bands or anything like that. Goes green. Let's say it goes green the rest of the way up. So you've got this very, very high spot right at the bottom. Now that's not really going to be typical rising damp, because you could argue it's the start of rising damp. Maybe it is. But what it's going to be more prevalent for is for a wall and floor joint. So if you've got solid wall construction, maybe quite thin brickwork, late Victorian going into the 1930s with solid concrete floors, there was often a disparity between the DPC and the floor, if there was any DPC in the concrete floor. And sometimes you can get a step between the damp proof membrane and the damp proof course, and in that gap, that's where the moisture comes through, leaches through into the plaster, and then rockets up through the plaster. And what you can often find is if you take the plaster off, that kind of just really kills it stone dead. It doesn't stop the problem, but it's where most of the contamination is. So that's a bit of a clue that there might be some wall to floor joint problems. And again, very, very prominent problem in that sort of 1940s through to 1950s sort of stuff. Another one now, let's take a look. You start at the bottom, starts out nice and low, and you're thinking, oh, that's great, I'm going to have a nice easy time with this one. And then it goes to green, and so you think maybe nothing of it. Now, would you go higher? Well, yes, you should really, just to see what's going on. And let's say that stays green like this. Is that going to stick on? Yes, it will. And so that's fine. And then you check to see if it's going to go salt band, and you think, oh yeah, it's gone to medium. So this could be salt band again. But then suddenly what happens is that the meter suddenly jumps and you get this massive high reading next in a band at around sort of 750 a meter, kind of where thereabouts. And then it does a funny sudden jump back to green. Now this is a slightly different pattern to this sort of slight rise and curve. This kind of goes getting worse, bang, nothing. Now what that tends to be is where there has been a replacement of a plaster render finish, but basically the contractor has not gone high enough, hasn't worked out that the contamination actually went higher. They normally stop at a meter, that's the standard place, but they should really check that it doesn't gone any higher, because if they don't do that, then this will get left, and any contamination left in the salt above will still absorb moisture from the air and will still set the meter off. So this is actually reactivating salts in the wall, which is a very common problem, and it's often misdiagnosed as rising damp. So that's your basic patterns then. So this is essentially rising damp sort of pattern. This is the salt band pattern. This is a floor joint pattern, and this is a kind of well, I suppose it's a misapplication of previous remedies. So what you can see here is that you can use these patterns to develop an idea of what might be going on. But just remember, that is not proof that there is rising damp or anything else, okay? But it is an indicator, and as an indicator, you can make a value judgment, okay? So what I want you to think about is what would happen if you were to put your damp meter around the wall. Let's say you're in a fairly modern house, thinking this is a fairly straightforward day, so you're in a cavity wall construction, and everywhere you put this, it reads extra high, extra high, extra high, extra high, extra high. Now I'm going to leave that to you to have a figure out what might give that result. Okay, now there's two I can think of. You may be able to think of three, so please do put your comments in the commentary box below and have a good old chat about that. If you've come across any specific readings that you found on a damp meter, please do put those down as well. And if you're enjoying the channel and you like this, please do sign up and also do a like. So I hope you've enjoyed that one, and we'll speak soon.